Hello, everyone, and welcome to Nerding Out on Neurodiversity, the podcast for all things neurodivergence. I'm Dr. Matt Zakreski, clinical psychologist and professional speaker, and I'm happy to be your host through the wild trails of the neurodivergent world.
And I'm Jake Noonan, educational coach and humanities teacher, your co-host and producer, and I'm thrilled to help share the stories and the experiences of wonderful people in the world of neurodiversity.
We're really excited for today's guest, which we are going to say a lot because we're always really excited about every guest we get. So let's get into it. Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Nerding Out on Neurodiversity. I'm your host, Dr. Matt Zakreski, clinical psychologist and professional speaker, here as always with my co-host and producer, Mr. Jake Noonan. Say hi, Jake.
Hi, everybody. Super excited for another wonderful episode with a fantastic guest, one who is a personal friend of mine. With us today is Rachael. Rachael, do you want to introduce yourself and tell everybody a little bit about who you are?
I'll do that. Yeah, so my name's Rachael Santapau. I am a good friend of Jake Noonan. These topics of conversation are not very far off from just the standard Jake and Rachael conversation. So I'm excited to kind of share mine and his random nuggets with the world.
Oh man, is it too late to change the podcast name to Random Nuggets?
I think you should change it to that.
Oh man, I'll have to talk to marketing. But yeah, it's a cool thing because while we've had some amazing professionals in the gifted world and the neurodivergent world on this podcast, the reason we call it Nerding Out on Neurodiversity is that neurodiversity looks like a lot of different things. It looks like different people, different walks of life. And someday we'll get Scott Barry Kaufman on here and that will make a lot of sense, right? But I also know that you have that lived experience, which I think is going to speak much more authentically to a lot of our audience. So with that said, can you give us your origin story? What's the background? What's the prequel? I want to hear all the things.
Oh gosh, the prequel. So I guess the prequel is I was born into a neurodiverse family that lacked the knowledge of the fact that they were neurodiverse. So just kind of traversing through life Jake has met my father. He's a very quirky man, but he existed in his life just being a quirky kind of oddball guy without the correct word for what he was, which was, or still is, he's still around, but being neurodiverse and because I do have a sister, 2 neurodiverse children. So my origin story was kind of having the stereotypical father that's all that therapy stuff sounds like quack stuff until I eventually got diagnosed. So I just kind of went through life just like my father, just kind of being an offbeat, kind of quirky, oddball kid without any title to put to this. So I think that's my true origin story is born to neurodiverse parents who really didn't have the words to attach to what they were.
So, and this is a story I hear a lot, right, in my job.
Yeah.
Every family's got that story. They've got the story that explains dad's neurodivergence, right? Was he a light bulb guy? Was he a train guy? Was he a bottle caps guy? Come on. I know there's a story that spells that out.
My dad is an everything guy. He was a research librarian up until he retired. There was always a phrase in his office where if he can't find it, the information doesn't exist anywhere. My dad is an information sponge. My dad is very fascinated by people. Once he gets talking to you, he will hold you hostage and you will be forced to have a conversation with him, whether you like it or not, because he wants to dig into what information can you share with him. But I guess his physical items were coins. To this day, my dad is a coin collector, which I'm not a true coin collector, but I picked that up off of him. Also, those little Warhammer figures, he never played it. He just paints them. That's what he did for a lot of my childhood. He had the little goggles and he would paint them. And those were his 2 big things that I remember as a kid. He would have lots of coins and he would be sitting in a corner just painting these Warhammer things. And then he had the stereotypical World War II dad, History Channel dad. That's, I think, more commonplace. But those Warhammer figures, like they are burned into my memory.
I think all of our listeners are getting a very clear picture of what that is, right?
Yeah.
You might be looking at their own dads and being word for
it. There is.
So that's great. And so if you don't mind sharing with our listeners, what's your particular flavor of neurodiversity?
My flavor of neurodivergency is new to me, but I've been diagnosed with autism spectrum disorder. But I've only been diagnosed for about a year now.
Okay. Wow. And getting diagnosed as an adult, especially as a female adult.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry, I'm assuming pronouns here. I should have done that in the pre-show. My apologies.
I do they/she, so female is fine, as Jake knows.
Well, thank you. And I'm glad I thought to even ask that. And we know, I mean, that a lot of autistic people are gender fluid, gender non-binary, right? Yeah. So it's a worthwhile question to ask, full stop.
Yeah.
Right? Particularly when we're asking these questions. So, I mean, what was that like? I mean, as an adult, it's hard enough as a kid.
Right.
It's so much harder as an adult. So what was that process like for you?
I mean, I feel very fortunate because there are a lot of autistic adults that do not have the support system that I have. I feel very thankful and I feel very lucky. So like there's a lot of it where, I didn't have like the isolation factor. I didn't have the loneliness factor. I as an adult have had like such like loving, friends in my circle, which was very different as a child. So I think that's why it was very difficult for me to get to this point as an adult. I was wrongfully diagnosed with bipolar disorder. I cannot remember if I was diagnosed as type 1 or type 2, as well as like a lengthy list of other things that ended up just falling under my autism spectrum disorder diagnosis. But as an adult, it was very difficult kind of grasping certain things that like I was just unable to push through and do. To this day, I think I've driven behind the wheel less than 10 times while I was able to get my license. I can't drive. It's overwhelming for me. It's overstimulating for me. And I always, that was very difficult for me as an adult to process, like trying to find work, trying to see my friends and see my loved ones with not having my license and thus not having a car and thus putting it on my friends where it's like, I need to get to this place or figuring out an alternative way to get there. That's like probably the biggest thing. But as an adult, I think I just fell into my dad's umbrella, which was I was just like this offbeat, like quirky person. And I was just like a little odd and a little strange. And just that's how a lot of people knew me. But yeah, it wasn't until about a year and a half to 2 years ago when I started thinking like, I've been diagnosed with bipolar for so long and medication just never worked. I still had all these things that like I was struggling with and no medication worked. And so finally, after talking to my therapist about it, that's how we ended up where I am today.
Wow. The red herring diagnoses that we see a lot in late diagnosed neurodivergence, bipolar, oppositional defiant disorder, right?
Mm-hmm.
Those are the ones, right? And we're like, oh, there we go. And if we should have gone longer, you probably would have gotten borderline, right?
Probably.
Hey, you got bad diagnosis, bingo, you win!
Like literally, I was just like checking them all off. And then at one point I was like, I could be all of these things, but I don't think I'm all of these things.
Oh, it's time for my episode pop culture reference. Did you ever watch the show Crazy Ex-Girlfriend?
I've never watched the show Crazy Ex-Girlfriend. I, as Jake knows, am a reality TV aficionado. That is what I mostly consume.
RuPaul. All RuPaul.
And I'm a Jersey Shore girl through and through, though.
I always forget that one too.
One of my best friends in the entire world dated Sammy's sweetheart's older sister growing up. And he's like, she was that way when I was 16 picking up her 16-year-old sister. And she was like 12 being like, who are you?
I'm obsessed with that. And I'm like actively trying not to be like, I know we have other things to talk about, but that's more interesting right now to me.
I mean, that's where I grew up. I grew up on the Jersey Shore. So, we can nerd out about that some other time.
Yes.
Well, so there's an episode of Crazy Ex-Girlfriend where the main character, Rachel Bloom, is being diagnosed with borderline personality disorder. And she goes through all the diagnostic criteria and they have little flashbacks for every piece of the diagnostic criteria. And her super codependent best friend's like, what about this? And she's like, oh God, it's me. And as someone who has borderline personality disorder in real life, it's very authentic portrayal.
Right.
But that's the problem with survey-based data and survey-based diagnostics is like, I could shoehorn 90% of my clients into those if I were so inclined.
Right.
So that's why I think we need to start with these neurological differences and then see like, how does that play out when a person meets friction with the world that's just not built for them, right? Because a true bipolar, a true ODD, a true borderline is going to be that way kind of all the time, right? Rather than like, hey guys, if you just let me wear the sweatpants I want to wear, I'm fine. But you're going to make me wear the khakis, and then the angry man comes out. The angry khakis, right? Khaki man, the recurring character now.
The second superhero we made.
Khaki man is somehow less powerful than what do we call schedule guy? I think
it was like schedule guy, and then I forget what his little sidekick guy was.
I mean, I'll just say schedule guy as somebody who's really bad at keeping a schedule like that is probably a really good power to have.
The entire neurodivergent community needs him on speed dial, right? That's like, schedule guy, I need you. Actually, I needed you yesterday. I forgot to call you yesterday. I know, I'm already there.
Yeah. I have a personal schedule guy. My one friend, that is like her thing. So she is schedule guy. So, well, she's schedule lady. So she exists out there in the world and I found her.
There's multiple. That's Jack as well.
Thank goodness for you and I, Jake.
Right?
My wife, Julia, too. I mean, it's, if I'm the head, she's the neck. And someday we will all be in a space together. We'll all look at each other and go, oh, it all makes so much sense. But until that day comes, we will continue along our podcast. Jake, why don't you ask a question? I've been rambling on.
I've got a question that goes off of everything we've been talking about and everything that's been brought up already. And it's just, if you can explain a little bit more about how a misdiagnosis of bipolar disorder, how that impacted you over time and how, like, now that you're later diagnosed and figured everything out more, like how that impacted you as well.
Oh my gosh. Having an incorrect diagnosis of bipolar disorder, I think made everything in my life much more difficult than it needed to be, because what I thought were these like highs and lows of mania were me having a meltdown, me, it just like, it never lined up fully. And, my manic episodes, quote unquote, just did not align with, and I know everybody's different, and even there's people with bipolar disorder, it's all going to be different, but it never fully aligned with what I had read about it, what my therapist at the time had explained to me. So I was just existing in this world where there were things about me that felt like, okay, this is not adhered to my diagnosis. So this is just something that's wrong with me. This is just something that I'm not doing. This is just something that I have to push through and figure out. Whether it's just like, I would like, if it is 78 degrees in my house, I will start losing my mind. Like I will start losing my mind and I will not be happy until it is back down to at a bare minimum 73. I would actually bare maximum. Let me rephrase that. Bare maximum 73. I'd prefer lower than that, but that's like when I'm good again. And me just thinking like, oh my gosh, I'm just being, a little bit difficult. I'm just being, a little bit hard to work with. I ran into this with my fiancé constantly, where I just thought I was being too agitating and too difficult. I couldn't cook a meal because it was too much for me. And I just, I just don't like cooking. And he's like, well, you gotta cook to survive. And I'm like, oh, but I am actively angry now. And I couldn't link that to anything that had to do with my bipolar disorder that I supposedly had. And taking medication wasn't doing anything. So I was just living in this constant state of, there's something wrong with me and I don't know if it's my own fault. So living in a world where I had a title, but the title didn't match what was going on inside. And I remember my current therapist that I have now, there were so many times where she just said that she was so shocked at how well I was doing being somebody with bipolar disorder off of medication. And we couldn't figure out what it was because I know my coping mechanisms were awful. And it wasn't until everybody, they see a TikTok and they're like, oh my God, I have this. And, that's a whole different conversation. But there were so many things that were lining up that I was like, I need to read actual information about this. And I need to talk to my therapist before I start jumping to conclusions. And once I told her that that's how I was feeling, and she said, okay, let's talk about it for a few months, and let's do some quizzes before we spend the money and do the long test. But that was life-changing. Now I know why I'm a monster when it's too hot in here. Now I know why cooking is so overwhelming and unbearable for me. And now I know why, when I like something, there's a joke, I can't like it a normal amount, but it's to a point where I could be in a conversation with Jake and he could be sharing something with me. And I'd be like, man, I really would like to end this conversation so I can talk about this fixation.
Pedro.
Yes, of course him. But whatever fixation I'm dealing with, or something that I'm like, oh, I just remembered this nugget of my favorite. And we'll do Jersey Shore, this thing that happened in season 2, episode 3, and Jake's just talking to me about normal stuff, but I gotta pretend I gotta listen to the normal stuff. I can just interrupt this conversation, talk about what I want. So those things all started to connect, and I started understanding why I had such difficulty in these supposed everyday things. So that updated diagnosis, that correct diagnosis, it was life-changing.
Such a powerful story, and thank you for sharing it.
Yeah.
This is such a tangible human thing, and it's amazing how easy it is to get it wrong.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things we've seen is that a lot of things that are identified as manic episodes might be a person hyperfixating.
Yeah.
Right? And the internal experience of that is very different, but the external perception of it looks very similar.
Yeah.
I have seen true mania, right? I said to go to every casino on the East Coast. It's oh, that's just mania. That's just what that is.
Yeah.
But a person sitting there and painting every Warhammer character that they have in the kit looks manic, but might not be, right? And we're just not that good at teasing out those little differences, especially when it comes to people assigned female at birth and gender non-binary people, right? These things they're modeled off upper middle class white boys.
Yep. And
as an upper middle class white boy, I'm so sorry. I think we say that at least once a podcast. It's we're so sorry. We're so sorry. We're so sorry. Everybody, so sorry. So there are people out there who are going to hear your story and be like, hold on a second. This doesn't have to be a millstone around my neck. I might have more control over this than I think I do.
Yeah. And I think that was the really big thing for myself, was having control to figure out, and especially having such a, I could sing my therapist praises till the end of time, but having somebody where when I brought that to her attention, she was ready to say okay, we're going to take some time to talk about this. And it's explained so much that it's almost I have moments of euphoria, finally realizing okay, this is what it always was. But then there's that whole deconstruction period, which is, I don't know who that's fun for, but that has been, it's been life-changing. This past year, I guess year and a half now of knowing what it is. It's just kind of I don't know how to navigate the world. I don't have all the answers, because nobody does, but I've been able to start connecting dots and start understanding what's happening in moments. And then my friends can understand, or my fiancé, my loved ones can understand what's happening in those moments.
And you think about it, having language to talk about these things is one of the biggest tools in our arsenal. I mean, Psychology 101 is we name it to tame it, right? And when right after my wife and I had started dating, we were driving up. We had done the Christmas thing at her parents' house, and we were driving up to New England to see my parents. And we left her parents' house, and we were driving on I-95 in Connecticut, which I'm pretty sure is the third circle of hell. And my wife got really quiet. And so I'm sitting there, I was like, what did I do wrong? What did I do wrong? I spent all of Connecticut thinking what I do wrong. And then she was like, She's like, oh, that was a nice nap. I was like, you were asleep? Like, I was torturing myself into like, boyfriend hell over here. She's like, no, sometimes I sleep with my eyes half open. I was like, you looked like you were judging me. And I will fully admit that's some of my shit, right? Like, ding, 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 right? But it's the sort of thing, once you know what's happening, you don't have to like it, but now you've got a set of rules and frameworks around it, right? So I'm sure your fiance can then pivot into what does Rachel need in this space mode?
Yeah, right. Yeah, I think that's been one of Jake knows him very well.
He's fantastic. I adore Mark. Not just because he plays guitar for me, but also because he's just fantastic as a person.
Yeah, I think I always knew he was going to be supportive, but that is very scary to kind of be like, hey, these things that like you've always been like really agitated about, and like you hate that I can't drive or that I don't drive, and you like really hate that like I freak out when I start cooking. Well, guess what? We have a name for it, and not really going away. So that's really scary. And he has been, beyond anything I think somebody could like need or want. And that realization, his way of pivoting and figuring out what I might need in the moment when I can't verbally speak it. And even accepting that sometimes what I need in that moment isn't him and he's not going to be beneficial for me with working through whatever's going on. And just like, it was just one of those things where he's like, oh, those are things that we can't change and it's tied to this. Well, I'm mad about it anymore. And it was just kind of like, it was such a relief because again, that's so scary to kind of be like, hey, we have a name for it. Hey, it's not going away. And if you want to keep being with me, you get to keep dealing with it. And that sucks for both of us. And he's just kind of like, oh, okay. Like, it was very much like Mark's not like this like big emotions guy, as Jake knows, but it was very much just kind of like, all right, cool. What do we do next?
Can you actually like explain a little bit about like what adjustments, what pivots Mark and you ended up making and how you handled that?
I definitely can. I'm also happy he's not home right now. So he would definitely be like absorbing all of this if he was listening and then like be like, you said all these great things about me. And I like, whenever I'm upset, I'd be like, no, don't tell him I said anything nice. Edit all of this out. I'm just kidding.
Maybe.
I have some bad news. This is a podcast.
No, I'm just kidding. But the way that looked is, the biggest thing was he just accepted that like driving was just really not going to be something that like I will be doing. I got my license. That's such a big deal. But like after driving with me twice with it, it was just very clear that like it was more dangerous for myself and others because of how overwhelming it was. But then being able to put that title to it, it was kind of like, okay, if we push through this, it's not really pushing through it. It's just making it worse. We're still trying to figure out what I can cook without getting in a bad mood. But like he will accept that easy to make meals are going to be easier or going to be better for me. Where, if he wants something that's more in depth, like he's welcome to cook that by himself. I honestly might just be making my favorite meal, which is a spicy chicken sandwich and tater tots. And, we'll have those separate dinners. It like he accepted that so quickly. But I think the number one thing that really kind of stood out, and I feel like I have to tell this story to like explain it, is we were at a wedding and it was this month and everything's fine. Weddings are pretty overwhelming, but I was doing fine. I was doing good. We get our meal and like my number one food issue is like tomato chunks. If there's tomato chunks in something, I won't eat it. And it wasn't listed that there was going to be tomato chunks in it. So we got that. So I was like, okay, well, I can eat some of this and like be fine. And there was like this like Polaroid camera being passed around. And one friend took a photo, very innocent. The flash was so bright that I was like, I need to get out of here. So I got up and I walked out. Mark did not follow me because that is typically overwhelming for somebody to follow me right away. He sat there, and our one friend, her name's Chris. She's also a very wonderful, lovely person. She started getting anxious and she asked Mark, she's like, what should I do? And Mark said, Rachel will tell us if she wants either of us. You just have to wait. And so sometimes Mark is not the person that I choose, and he accepts that. And so after I think about 5 minutes, Mark said, if you want to text her, you can. If she doesn't answer, she doesn't want either of us. And so that's what she did. And that was like such like clear direction that he just accepted it. I mean, that even happened at a Danger Club show that Jake was at, where it was too overwhelming. I started spiraling. There was too much noise or too many people. It was also unbearably hot in that basement. And I started becoming very overwhelmed. And Mark was like, I just got to pack up and then I'll be good to go. And I said, I actually don't want anything to do with you right now. I was like, I needed Jake in that moment. I was like, he's the person that I feel like is going to calm me down. And Mark was like, okay. And that was it. It's like he's never upset if he's not the person that I need in the moment, but he'll just say, okay, whatever you need. If I walk away, he knows that he's just got to wait a little bit and ask, or I'll let him know. So that was like such like a pivotal thing once Chris shared that with me, that Mark just said, she'll let us know. She's really good at that. The last thing you want to do is overwhelm her and make this worse, because then we will need to leave.
Wow. I mean, and that's not only making those coping strategies so explicit, right? And objective.
Yeah.
I may not need you. I mean, like loving somebody is an egoless act. And it's hard. It's hard to decenter ourselves from that, because I'm sure Mark loves you very much, right?
I hope so.
Right. But one would assume.
I'm pretty sure he does.
Yeah, he does.
Excellent. Very good. And now here's our surprise guest, Mark. Right?
Oh my gosh, I would cry.
But I mean, to be able to decenter yourself and say that what the person I love most needs right now isn't me is a very powerful thing. It's a powerful manifestation of love.
Right.
And that was funny. Like when I became a dad, that was one of the hardest things for me. My kids would fall and they'd be like, Mommy. I'm like, but I am right here. I'm a very capable human. Like, but Mommy. And I was like, but this isn't about me right now. Right? It's about what my 2-year-old needs. And I don't know if Mark likes it, but you keep using the word accept. And I think accept is exactly the right verb here, because it's about navigating this moment.
Right.
I'm sure given the choice, you'd love to be able to drive a car and cook elaborate meals.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
No one's choosing the path you're on right now, but it's the path you're on. So we accept it and we navigate that path as best we can. Wow, what a powerful thing. That's amazing.
Yeah, I think that decentering, because one of the things that I navigate with him and I navigate with a lot of people is one of the things that I've always experienced growing up and even into my early adulthood was that like now I know when things were overwhelming and I was overstimulated, I was making too many things about myself. Everything was about myself. It's like, oh, well, these, pants that my mom got me feels weird and I don't like them and I don't like them. This gift that, so-and-so got me, I just don't like and I don't like it. And I'm going to be very vocal about it because that's what you're supposed to do or that's how it was in my mind. Or, oh, like if there's too many people here and I don't like it and I need to leave and I don't like it. And that's something I heard for so long is like, you make everything about yourself and everything has to be about yourself and your comfort when it's, like you were saying, like the khaki pants can really just make me into this unbearable, angry person to be around. And I might need, the sweatpants to kind of feel more like myself and like a person. And it's so much to like ask them, like, especially when like I was told like I make everything about myself for so long. Now those are moments that I desperately like need it to be about me. And he just decentered himself so quickly. And that's like, I don't know what goes on in his brain, but that was a very wonderful thing to experience.
So we've talked a lot about your personal life.
Right.
And I'm actively shifting out of therapist mode into podcast host mode because I'm like, let's explore. No, we're not going to do that. Right? I get paid good money to ask those questions. Switching. So with everything that's gotten you to this point in your life, what do you do for work? Like, what's your 9 to 5?
My 9 to 5 is I do recruiting for a retail corporation. I'm specifically not going to state what it is, but essentially I do recruiting at a store-based level. So I do associates, leads, supervisors. I do recruiting for distribution centers from time to time. It is I would say, very typical 9-to-5 job. The great thing about my job is I work permanently remote. I'm entirely work from home. So my job is very cool about that, which is really wonderful. But yeah, I have a super regular 9-to-5.
So super regular 9-to-5 job.
Mm-hmm.
And this is going to sound like a weird question, but like, do you like it?
I do. I would say I like it in the aspect of I am not miserable every second of the day. I worked retail for a long time, front-facing retail, which now knowing what I know, it's grueling for a regular, neurotypical person. It's grueling even more for a neurodivergent person. But I do like my job. I mean, some days are harder than others, but I really like that I work from home. I don't really have to deal with the peopling aspect too much. I still have meetings, so I still have to do what I'm kind of doing right now, get on camera and chat. But I just like my job. I like it a lot better than any other job I've had before.
Well, that's awfully cool. Is this the thing that you sort of thought that you would do growing up? Like, was this I can see myself doing this?
No, I never thought I would be somebody who had 10 years of front-facing retail under their belt. I did not think that I'd be getting into the recruitment aspect. I actually wanted to get into storyboarding. That was my ultimate dream job as a kid, and that is not what I'm doing. I stumbled very much into this job. And yeah, so it's very different from what childhood Rachel thought that she was going to do.
So if it wasn't the dream job growing up, how is it that you get that neurodivergent itch scratched? Are there ways you can make challenges for your job, gamify it? Do you do something special on the side? Do you just count the minutes every day? What's the secret sauce?
So I guess my secret sauce is I am so into my fixations, before I clock in and when I clock out. And I guess I listen to music on the job and I get very fixated on music. So that makes it very easy. If I want to do something that's nerdy or is aligned with a special interest or a hyperfixation, it is typically pretty much happening off the clock. I do have coworkers who have some of the same interests as me. So if we have a casual chat, that itch gets scratched in the middle of the day. But I mean, I don't have an Etsy shop. I will clock out and I'll be all right, time to watch my 50 reality shows and aggressively text my friends who watch them too about every thought that comes to my head about it, or whatever Disney thing's going on, whatever my fixation is, or what I want to nurse in that moment is typically happening before I clock in, when I clock out, and occasionally sprinkled throughout the day if somebody messages me asking the right thing about a non-work related item.
And I think there's something to be said for scheduled joy.
Yeah.
I think there's this idea that joy's got to be spontaneous, right? It's got to be things just manifests. And nah, man, yes, it would be awesome if you were sitting in the office and all of a sudden, the grand dame knocks on your door, I need you right now. You're
yeah.
But if you know that come 5:00, you can disappear under your favorite blanket with a cup of tea and watch Real Housewives of Des Moines. I want to say Kansas City,
whatever the Real Housewives is going on right now.
I would actually watch Real Housewives of Des Moines. I think that would be fun.
I think you're onto something. I think we need to call some people.
Get Andy Cohen on the phone.
Get Jake, Adam right now.
Done.
Now that would be a get. That would be a podcast get.
That would be a guess, but it would just be us pitching Real Housewives of Des Moines.
As I vacillate from pitching him things to just fanboying very hard.
I'll do the pitching. You can fanboy.
Go see. What would Jake do?
Monitor? I don't know.
I mean, sure.
I was going to say, for once, Jake is the adult in the room. There's the first time for everything.
It does not last long, I promise.
I think you can be an adult for an hour while I pitch this show.
Yeah, after like 20 minutes, all of a sudden Jake's like, look what I can do, and does like a backflip. And we're like, there,
Well, that would be way cooler than pitching anything. I would love to see Jake do a backflip.
Oh, I can't even try anymore. My Achilles.
Oh, that's right. Oh, gosh. Well, I can't do a backflip.
I guess Dr. Matt might just have to.
Can you do a backflip, Dr. Matt?
Oh, yeah, totally. Let's change the subject immediately away from bum, 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 bum. So, do you get to storyboard in any capacity? Like, do you draw on the side? Like,
I have not engaged in visual arts since I actually dropped out of college. And when I say not engaged, it's been very sporadic. But yeah, I don't do storyboarding on the side anymore or at all. I don't really paint very much. I don't draw very much. I occasionally write. I guess that's where my storyboarding goes. But yeah, it's little Rachel wanted to be a storyboard artist, and adult Rachel really doesn't do visual art anymore.
And it sounds to me like you've created a life where you're getting enough of those needs met in other ways that you don't really need so much of that right now. But maybe as your life goes on, there's always room to find your creativity.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, creativity can come at any point and come in different ways. So like, while I'm not doing visual art right now, I have been writing a bit more here and there. And so like that creativity is like, I'm not really doing anything with it. It's all for myself, but like, that's all that really matters. And, occasionally I still have all my sketchbooks. I still have all my painting supplies. So it'll come when it comes, and I'll hopefully be in a good space to dive back into it.
I really want to highlight that, because creativity can come at any time. Right? So if you're out there listening to this and being like, that part of my life has passed me by, it's never too late. Creativity takes so many different forms. And whether it's writing or art or community theater or singing in the choir or, having a uke on YouTube channel, right? I feel like there's a YouTube joke in there somewhere that I may have missed. Hey, yeah, there we go. Yeah, it's like how there's like theater Twitter, there's YouTube. It's a thing. But yeah, I mean, we all contain multitudes, and we need to find ways to address those multitudes as best we can. So that's really cool. Now, you said before that you weren't going to name the people you work for, which I totally get. Are you out at work, out as a neurodivergent person?
Yes. So that was a big risk that I took, because I know that can go south sometimes. I have a really wonderful boss. She's somebody who, I think that if we could clone her and like every workplace gets like one of her, that would be really cool. But while I know cloning's real, I don't think we're doing it on people right now. Unless we're doing that now, that'd be cool. But I felt comfortable enough coming out as neurodivergent at work, just because I knew that there were moments where I was perceived as difficult to work with. And if I was able to figure out if there were accommodations, if I could get them, what would that look like? What could I do? I knew that the boss that I have right now was somebody that I could be open and honest with. I knew that she'd be open and honest with me about like what realistically my company can do, because all companies can only do so many things. I understand why people choose not to come out as neurodivergent at work. There's countless horror stories out there, but my boss truly has like made it our workplace like a safe enough space where like anybody could like come to her about anything. And if she could figure out a way to help, she would do that. So yeah, when I got my official diagnosis, my therapist was very kind to like write something up to give to my boss, and we were able to work together. So yeah, I am out as neurodivergent at work. I do have some coworkers who are aware that I'm neurodivergent, but it's not like a widely known thing.
And as a member of the LGBTQ community, how does that language of outness, like that coming out process, does that feel like that fits both aspects, your neurodivergence and your LGBTQ identity?
I definitely think that coming out, with neurodivergency and coming out under like the LGBTQIA umbrella, I would not say that it's identical, because everybody, again, is going to be different. What's going to be more difficult for me to come out as, whether it's, being under that umbrella or being neurodivergent, that's going to look different for Jake. That's going to look different for somebody else. It's going to look different for you, Dr. Matt, like for whatever anybody identifies as. But there is a coming out process for both of those, because especially, I am, in a heterosexual, facing relationship. I don't know if I like come off as neurodivergent. I think because I am similar to my dad, I probably do. But there is still a coming out process with both of those. So I think that for myself, it, depending on the person, weighs differently. But again, I can't say that for everybody. But for myself, I would say there is a coming out process for both, because I almost like went on this like tour with my friends when I got diagnosed with autism spectrum disorder, when I did the same thing when I was like, all right, like, don't really feel like, full woman, but like I still do, but I don't like it, it just kind of felt like this like little tour that I did with everybody.
Because that's what the language in the field looks like. It really is sort of, there's a parallelness to both of those processes. As a cishet guy, I'm always like, let me check in, because I can use that language as a member of the neurodivergent community, but I cannot speak for the comfort level of other communities, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Wow. Thank you for that.
Can we pause? Is that possible? Because it is the witching hour and my dog will not leave me alone.
Their dog's adorable.
He will not come in here and start being a nuisance.
It's a beautiful thing. If we did commercial breaks, right? That'd be like great time for commercial break. Like, oh, well, here's a word from our sponsors.
That would be perfect.
It'll be like every ad's just for dog treats, specifically for Jake. Not me, Jake, but dog Jake.
Well, you're human Jake, so not you, human Jake. But
sorry, real Jake
real
as opposed
Jake.
to human Jake.
What a human Jake thing to say. I'm telling you.
I know. These human Jakes, I just can't.
We're a problem. I'm sorry.
Not everything's about you, human Jake.
Right, it should be about dog Jake.
He is the star of every show.
Rachel, one of the topics that I wanted to hear a little bit more about are the things that you brought up, whereas having your world tour, in a sense, in both ways, coming out as queer and coming out as neurodivergent to your friends.
Yeah.
So just like how that felt, how that went for you, how people responded, just kind of like the general experience, really.
So it's funny. I feel like I've done so many world tours of coming out as LGBTQIA, because I did the fun, typical thing where I like came out of the closet and I was like, I'm going back in. And then I like came out and I go back in. So I think by the time that the final world tour happened, all my friends were like, oh my gosh, we know, like, please stop doing this. So I think by like that ending point, everybody was just sick of me being like, hey guys, like, I'm not straight. And they're like, we're very aware of that. You keep telling us this. I think my world tour of coming out as neurodivergent was a little bit different, because it was like, I was so sure that I was bipolar. I was so sure. And then all of a sudden I wasn't sure. And then all of a sudden I actually wasn't. So while my reality of being LGBTQIA, I definitely went through my questioning process before I, realized that I was a part of that community. And I think it was also beneficial that I have had like a lot of friends who have like gone through that journey alongside me. The world tour was definitely like easier once I was finally like, all right, guys, like, I'm not going back in there. But coming out with autism spectrum disorder and like explaining that to my friends was very difficult, in the aspect of these things that my friends have already like done. Because again, I feel very supportive to like accommodate me, whether it's, coming to pick me up and give me a ride, or, whatever they were doing at the time, there was almost like an end date in their minds. Now there's no end date. Especially my friends who like knew me when I got that bipolar diagnosis. That was such like for myself, a difficult thing to kind of say, like, this is not the reality that I thought it was. And I've experienced mostly friends being very supportive. I've experienced loved ones saying like, oh, like, are you sure about that? Or, my least favorite thing in the universe of hearing like, everybody's like a little bit autistic. Like, I get it. Yeah, like that is I could remove a sentence from the universe, like that would be one of the ones I would consider, because I don't know what sentence I would actually remove from the universe, but that would be one of them. But that was more difficult for me, because I think because I did that back and forth for so long, coming out as LGBTQIA, that once I finally came out, everybody was in agreement of, we know, we're aware, we support you. And it's not that people were like, some people weren't shocked, some people were shocked that this has kind of been me almost explaining what I know at the time and then coming with updates. So it's this constant conversation, whereas telling somebody I'm not straight and I, identify as genderqueer, like that just kind of ends it. Whereas, me saying like, oh, I realized this is a part of my diagnosis. And now I realize that this is a part of my diagnosis. And this thing that I used to do as a kid, this was a part of my diagnosis. So it's almost like when it comes to that, it almost feels like I'm coming out constantly. Like it's endless.
Really, I think that's what it is. It is a constant coming out process because in that way you run up against the macro culture, right? We are neurominorities. You're a gender minority, right? And there's nothing wrong with those minority identities, but that's why I think people in this community bang the drum so hard for equity, right? It's like, give us what we need, because there's nothing to say that a grown adult needs to drive a car.
Right.
Uber's a thing. You don't need to be able to cook. Postmates is a thing, and microwave meals are a thing. Like,
right.
When you talk to somebody as though their choices are somehow less than, I think you infantilize that person.
Yes. And that seems to be a thing that comes with like neurodivergency as a whole, is the infantilization process, where it doesn't even matter if they have my diagnosis or if they're diagnosed with ADHD, if they have bipolar disorder. There is this infantilization process where it's like you are seen more like childish than like others that are your age. You are seen more like you're just not up to par with other people your age. So it's like being in your 30s and maybe, you're still wearing like, the only show I can think about right now is like Steven Universe, but you're still wearing like Steven Universe merchandise and like, maybe, you do your makeup really funky, like, maybe early 20-year-olds would do, and that's like how you can feel close to yourself. Like as a neurodivergent person, people can quickly infantilize that and be like, oh, well, you're being childish. Like you should look and act a certain way once you're an adult. But being an adult, it's like, can't you really kind of do whatever you want? And like, if I want to dress crazy, I could dress crazy. If I want to wear all one color, I can wear all one color. Like the Green Lady of Brooklyn, I think it's Brooklyn, but she wears all green all the time. Her hair is green. Everything she owns is green. Like, and she's like, I think she's in her 70s. She might be in her 80s. And like, she's an adult. Like she's doing what she wants.
I mean, I say this all the time to the parents of my clients. I'm like, your kid is restricted in eating and restricted in dress, but as an adult, you are too, but you have choice.
Right.
As an adult, if all I want to eat every night is chicken fingers, nobody can stop me. Right. But as with kids, it's like, well, you got to have, the 4 colors on the plate. And it's just like, yes, objectively more nutrients are good, but like we forget as adults how much more choice we have. And that works for the workplace too. Like you being able to work from home, that is an accommodation we can need of every single person on this planet. And, and you do better in that space. And that means they get the access of this amazing employee who brings a unique perspective to the job. No one loses in that scenario.
Right. And I think that that's something across the board is like, well, especially from a work from home aspect. But yeah, us as adults, like we have so much choice that, children typically do not have. But I think that there comes with shaming of other adults' choices just in general. I do feel that it is more intense when it comes to people who are neurodivergent and choose not to hide those aspects of themselves, which should honestly like be celebrated because it's really scary to not hide those things. Like again, we have choice. So if, a neurodivergent person wants to wear like their favorite show on their shirt and look a little different, like, I don't know, it's not hurting anybody. Who cares?
If I had a nickel for every time during the week I said it's not hurting anybody, who cares, I could pay my student loans, right? So I'm right there with you on that. I can't believe I have made it this far without saying this. Yes, Steven Universe, here for it, love it. I'm Steven!
It's funny, I've seen maybe only 10 episodes of it, but that was the only show that came to my brain.
I have a Gravity Falls t-shirt that I wear, and sometimes people look at me funny, and I'm like, you're just missing out because it's the greatest show ever created by human.
I titled myself a Disney adult, and I don't have too much Disney merch anymore, but like when I do wear it out, people are like, oh, you're in your 30s wearing Disney merch? And I'm like, this was expensive. Of course I'm wearing it right now. Like, who cares?
Well, I'm sorry. Do you hate joy?
Yeah, like that's what it is. Like, do you not want to be happy? Like, that's your problem.
So basically, be your awesome nerdy self. And if you can find an environment that lets you do that at work, all the better for it. And I love all that. This is honestly such a cool and inspiring story, Rachel. You're a delight.
Oh, thank you.
People are really going to get a lot of good stuff from this. So let's wrap up with our final questions. Jake, you want to take the lead?
Yeah, absolutely. So, Rachel, I know that you said you would take a sentence out, but my question for you is, what's your favorite word and why?
Oh, my favorite word. That's really difficult. I feel like I'm going to upset the neurodivergent community and upset all of my friends when my favorite word changes, but my current favorite word is moist, which everybody hates that word. It starts and ends strong. And I think that people don't give the word moist enough credit for that, because I think it starts strong and it ends strong.
I mean, tell you, our viewer numbers for this episode are going to crater at this moment.
I'm so sorry.
Throwing their phones in the sea.
I feel like I've done such a good job, and everybody's going to be like, wow, I hate that person now. They just said their favorite their favorite word is moist.
We're actually just deleting the entire recording now.
Oh, okay. That was my plan.
In the last recording, I did fire Jake. So, I mean, it's, just, they're getting worse and worse, guys. Oh, well, okay. Well, hopefully this one goes better as I, jet clean out my ears. If you could have one superhero on speed dial, who would it be and why?
Well, I'm not going to pick Schedule Lady because I already have her. If I could have one superhero on speed dial, I would have to go for entirely selfish reasons. I'd have to go with Spider-Man. Spider-Man has been my favorite superhero since I was a kid. He's my dad's favorite superhero. I just like that Spider-Man was one of the first superheroes who was just some kid. He was just some kid just trying to go through puberty and be a superhero. Awful experience, but he figured it out and he did it. So, I'm sure I could pick a superhero that could do cool things. Not that Spider-Man can't, because he can, but superheroes that could improve my life, or I could be very selfish and pick the new Reed Richards, which I think Jake was expecting me to say.
I really was, to be honest.
I thought you were expecting that. I'm a huge Pedro Pascal fan, but I have to say Spider-Man, I will take any iteration of Spider-Man. I'm probably going to regret that. I bet you they're going to pick somebody terrible next, and this is going to live on forever. But I would pick Spider-Man.
We're here for it. I mean, I'm a big Spider-Man fan, so you'll get no complaints from me. I think Spider-Man is that if a superhero can be an everyman, I think that's kind of the appeal of Spider-Man, right?
Right. That's why he's my favorite.
He's not a billionaire. He's just a kid. And I think that's really what makes him so...
Yeah.
Spider-Man's top 3 for me.
Who are the other 2? Am I allowed to ask that?
Of course. So Batman, Wolverine, Spider-Man, in no particular order, but they're...
Okay. That's an acceptable top 3.
I thank you. And then we can get into some of the more obscure ones, but that's a different podcast. Okay. So we've asked you our final questions. Rachel, is there anything you'd like to leave our listeners with?
I think the one thing that I can leave your listeners with is just be patient, period. Yourself, with others. Patience is key, and it's not always an easy road, and it's not always a fun road. But patience is what got me here. And I feel a lot better than younger Rachel did. So just patience, be patient.
That is very humble and very good advice. And we thank you for it.
Thank you.
Okay. Well, what a great episode this was. I feel like I learned a lot and I had a good time. Well, we always have a good time, but I had a particularly good time with you.
Thank you.
Thank you again for sharing your story with our listeners. I think people are going to get a lot from this. But for everybody here at Nerding Out on Neurodiversity, this was an awesome episode. Thank you for listening. Thanks for tuning in.
Bye, everybody. Rachel, thank you again. It was fantastic having you on the show. And I hope to see you at our next Danger Club show.
You'll see me at a different next show. You won't see me at that next show. So you'll see me soon. But is this where I say bye? I'm so awkward with this kind of thing.
Well, we'll all say goodbye. And we hope to see you guys again soon. Thanks so much for listening. Take care.
Bye.
Nerding Out on Neurodiversity is brought to you by Dr. Matt Zakreski and the team at the Neurodiversity Collective. To learn more about the Neurodiversity Collective or to be a guest on the podcast, please visit our website at www.theneurodiversitycollective.com/podcast. Audio and production by Jake Noonan. Show your support by subscribing, leaving a 5-star review, and telling your friends about us. Our Instagram and social media handles are at #NoonPodcast, NOON podcast. Your support is appreciated and keeps us going. All discussions presented on this podcast are strictly for informational purposes, awareness, and understanding. The advice presented is not and should not be considered to be therapeutic in nature. If you have any mental health questions, please contact your provider. All rights reserved.